The Gulf of Mexico is sort of like a mature field. We're going to get much more growth out of that anyway. So I don't really think it's going to have any impact on offshore. Essentially, the bans are on areas where there's not much oil.
Offshore, Biden ban on new drilling. Hi team, Biden's attempt to sabotage Trump's drill baby drill with ban on new offshore drilling in the Atlantic and Pacific brings me to question how this would affect our offshore themes. Is there any list or map giving an overview of the potential drilling fields worldwide? To which level of percentage would that kind of decision impact the total offshore oil capacity? And there's a link there to a Zero Hedge article, and that's from Gerhard. A recent Doomberg article, The Bitter End, references Biden's ban on offshore drilling and indicating that it cannot be overturned. Assuming that this is true, despite Trump's assertion that he will overturn it, what impact will the ban have on the offshore oil and gas thesis? Thanks, folks. That's from James.
Okay, so if you look at what Biden was, what a facetious little prick. If there's any doubts about that guy, what he just did with his family, like giving all those pardons and even to Fauci, and what a twit. Anyway,
nothing quite says trust the science like a blanket preemptive ban.
Yeah.
On Fauci.
Apis. Anyway, that aside. So essentially the bans are on areas where there's not much oil or gas. It doesn't affect the Gulf of Mexico as it stands. It'll affect areas closer to Florida, but not the...
Isn't it going to be the Gulf of America?
No. Oh, yeah, I've heard that.
That's right.
Gulf of America. Yeah, exactly. So it doesn't have any impact on the Gulf of America or Mexico, whatever you want to call it. In any event, the Gulf of Mexico is sort of like a mature field. We're going to get much more growth out of that anyway. So I don't really think it's going to have any impact on offshore. Look, in any event, where's all the growth in offshore going to come? West Africa, it's off Brazil and Ghana. So sort of South America, Falkland Islands. We keep winking and hinting, folks. It takes you notice of us. And Southeast Asia. It's in the Middle East as well. That's shallow water. The North Sea is mature. There's obviously more work to go on there, but it's no great development. But when it's all said and done, Gerard and James, it's not going to affect the offshore oil thesis at all. I'm sure that Trump will find a way of untangling the mess that Biden's made. But anyway.
Offshore versus onshore. You mentioned that there are better opportunities in the offshore oil and gas sector than in onshore. When we talk about oil and gas service companies that provide equipment, isn't it irrelevant whether they are onshore or offshore service companies? Onshore oil companies have to drill extensively regardless of whether there is little or much oil in the basins, and they must constantly drill new wells to maintain or increase production. In fact, one could argue that onshore needs to drill more than before, as the oil is harder to access, thereby requiring just as much equipment. And that's from Chris.
Drilling is a small part of the overall process. If we take offshore, what happens? Well, first of all, they go to find out if there's oil likely there. So a seismic survey. They tow streamers over and try and 3D imaging or whatever they do. And let's say the thing, it's probably likely oil down there. So then they'll employ the likes of Valaris, Transocean, whatever, to drill some holes. Touch wood, they find some oil. What they do, they then put, and this is all that offshore driller does. Drill a hole, finds the oil, they put a plug on top. Hopefully that plug works, which it didn't with, no, that wasn't quite the case with the BP disaster. Anyway, I digress. So that's what they do. Then once that's finished, you have various different subsea service companies come along and perform what you got here. So all this here happens after the hole has been drilled and capped. So, the likes of Saipem and FTI, they will do all the subsea service stuff in Subsea 7. Then we have FPSOs. You'll have various other things. So there's a whole lot more that goes on. The actual drilling part is a very, very small part of the whole process. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, in terms of offshore versus onshore, well, our thinking there was that the mostly onshore in the US at least has been with shale. We think that's sort of peaking, and most of the emphasis is going to go on offshore now as opposed to onshore. We'll see. We're quite confident that holding, even though that Trump wants to drill the hell out of everything. We'll see what happens. It's a very different situation now, Chris, than what it was 10, 15 years ago in US shale. We're peaking now in US shale. So hopefully we've done a good enough quick job of answering your question there, Chris.